Hey guys, this is Patrick Carl-Sedermoon. You might know me as the guy with the most IM medals in the world, or something like that. I'm also the CGO of Fnatic, and you're watching Duncan Thorin Shields YouTube channel. Pleasure being here.
ESL have announced huge changes to the format and the setting of the matches for their ESL Pro League Season 9, which will start next year. So this is the big online league from ESL. It's the biggest online league in Counter-Strike, actually. Obviously, in CSGO, we also have ECS, which is run by Faceit, and in part owned to some degree by the teams, I believe. I think it was in partnership initially. I think the initial deal was supposed to somehow work with Twitch, but obviously they switched to YouTube for that. So the major changes to this system, first and foremost, the matches, if you're in the European or the Americas region, will be played offline. There will be no online games. For APAC, which is the Asia Pacific region, so Australia, New Zealand, China, Korea, etc., that will all still be played online, as in past seasons of EPL. Obviously, we only actually got those regions added to EPL in the last year or two. You know, wasn't that long ago. It was only a Europe and technically North America, but then eventually America's situation. Now, in terms of the actual format of the tournament, we'll go into the other aspect beyond this. I wanted to get the details out there. We can actually just go ahead and immediately have a look at exactly what the situation is for these teams. So you can see here in this format, okay, so I'll move my webcam for a second. You can see, look, I've hidden a box there. If you look in the bottom left, there's a group that I'm hiding. So the format now goes like this. You start off at the bottom here. So we're at the bottom level, Europe, Americas, Asia. They're the three regions. So for Europe, you have 4 groups of 4 teams. So each team's in a separate group. You're not playing teams except the ones that are in your group. The first place team from each 4 group in Europe goes to the finals for Europe. So they're going to the grand finals themselves just by winning each of these 4 groups. It's a tournament, really, not a league in the traditional sense. More like E-League, as you could contrast it to. Now, the second and third place teams in these groups at the bottom for Europe go into round 2, which is the second stage up, where 4-team groups again, 2 4-team groups. And this time, it is first and second of this stage in each group go through to the final, meaning at the end you have 8 teams from Europe because you have the 4 that finished first place in the first stage, and then you have the top 2 teams from each of the second groups. There's your 8 teams from Europe. Over in America, the Americas, so North America and South America, again you have 4 groups with 4 teams in them. Obviously, you can have teams that aren't just from North America. Then the winner goes again directly to the finals. Second and third go to round 2, but that's where it's different because North America / Americas has less slots for the final, as it should do, quite frankly. And so this time, only the winner of each of those 2 groups for the Americas goes to the final, which makes up the 4 first place teams and the winner of each of the next 2 groups, the 6 slots for North America / the Americas. Then you go to APAC, Asia Pacific region. They start out with the same format. They have the 4 groups with 4 teams in them. You will note that they've purposely split up. For example, I believe that's the flag of Malaysia in the right-hand corner. It looks like to be Malaysia, Singapore, Thailand. Or is it Indonesia? And then they have China has their own group for logistical reasons. They have to play each other. And then Australia and New Zealand has their own 2 groups. They've been the better region in terms of the sub-region within the APAC region. Then you have a group that's all the Australia and New Zealand squads in one group. Understandably, they obviously can't all play with the same ping with the others. And then you have the Chinese, Thailand, Indonesia, so all in their own group. So the key detail here is there is no winner of the group going directly to the finals for APAC because you're only going for 2 slots overall and you've split it up into sub-regions, so it wouldn't necessarily be fair to go directly there, right? So then what you're going to do instead is first and second out of the first stage of groups go into the next stage of groups, and then first from each of these groups, so it will be a team from Australia or New Zealand and a team from China, all those other countries. Those 2 teams make up the final 2 slots for the Pro League finals and go to the finals themselves. To start with the factor of playing offline games now, no longer playing online except if you're in the APAC region, which obviously logistically hasn't yet found a logical way why you'd go offline. There's not as big viewership, there's not the same kind of funding there. But for Americas and for Europe, this is a big deal for the teams. First of all, it means no more having to travel and play games at events. This is a big, big deal. A lot of teams were playing ECS and EPL games in the off day of an event, on the media day of an event, sometimes during event days, but like it was a smaller LAN and they'd have to play their matches after their tournament matches and get scheduling done for them that way. So the fact that you're only going to travel to this one location, which if you're in Europe is a fairly central location. If you're in the Americas, we don't yet know where it is, but you're going to that same location over and over again. First of all, it'll be a lot more comfortable to play from there. You'll get used to going there. Presumably, it will fix the scheduling issues that I just alluded to there, which quite frankly is the most interesting aspect of this deal, aside from the offline component, that I think people are missing, which is how did they get it so that these teams committed to playing from the LAN studios on those days, but there can't be an event overlapping with it, because how could you play at that LAN tournament when you're on site, on LAN, offline to play your games at the ESL studios in Europe or wherever they're going to end up hosting it in the Americas? That seems as though they've made the teams decide they're prioritizing EPL, and they will prioritize it to the extent that other tournament organizers in the scene are going to have to balance their tournaments and when they're held around these particular dates. Unless I'm incorrect on that, I'd love to know from EPL, because it sounds like from the ESL side of things that this is a big coup for them, getting people to commit to play for these days because there aren't online games anymore. Or is there an option for online? Doesn't seem so, right? It's like E-League, you have to travel there. Now, with there being different groups, just like E-League, that's the reason E-League initially created that format, by the way, having different teams in different groups and not doing a big league or a one big tournament that you all go for, is so that the other tournaments in the scene could take place, so that if Dignitas plays in Group A on week 1, okay, they can't play in another LAN tournament, but Virtus Pro can. And then the next week, Virtus Pro might be at E-League playing, and now Dignitas is off playing a different LAN tournament. That's why in 2016 it didn't really impact the LAN scene as much to have these teams in attendance playing there, just as when you went back this last year, 2017, you couldn't, for example, have played ESG Mykonos and been in one of the groups for E-League, because again, that was the schedule overlap, but because you split into groups, you could still have a number of top teams at a tournament like that. So this will make, I'm going to go ahead and say it right now, the quality of the games will be much, much better, because they're on LAN now. These will be the best circumstances to play in. It will be the same studio you play in again and again. There'll actually be less variance in theory than traveling to random LANs that you've never attended before or new locations that you've never been to before. I also think it will make teams take these games more seriously, because they're flying in, because they're preparing, because they know the days that they're going to play on it can't get rescheduled or mixed around, or they don't have another tournament that week to think about. I think it will actually make the quality of the LAN finals better in two crucial senses. First of all, it will mean that the better teams qualify, because it's a LAN environment, and therefore we accept the results on LAN are much more, right? It's not like when you play the games online. Underdog teams that do qualify will have proved themselves more, because they'll have succeeded offline to get to those LAN finals. Now we may as well just call them the finals, right? Except if you're in APAC. So there are no excuses, quite frankly, for a top team not qualifying, or for an underdog team not making it themselves, or an underdog team making it and people trying to downplay them. No, they'll have done it legit on LAN. I also think, crucially, the LAN finals, or the finals, will now be much, much better, because now they could potentially be one of the best events of the entire year. At the moment, as good as EPL is, as good as ECS is, they can never be the best tournament of the year, because in ECS you only have 4 teams from Europe go. Therefore, what if the top 6 teams in the world from Europe? You can't have 2 of the top 6 teams in the world at your LAN finals. You're never going to compete with a major or an E-League like that if you have that kind of setup. What about if you're over in Europe? Well, Europe is so competitive that you've ended up with scenarios where even for EPL, where we had like 6 teams going, we had all these teams, more teams than that going, it didn't matter. You still got so much competition with so many games that there would always be elite teams who ended up missing out on going to the LAN finals. So for the last one, for Season 8, no FaZe Clan. You didn't have them in attendance. For Virtus Pro, many seasons they were bad in Pro League and never would make the offline finals. For Season 5, you might remember when Astralis was the #1 ranked team in the world, they did not get to attend the Season 5 finals. Neither did FaZe Clan, who was the #2 team in the world. Instead, you had G2 and SK there, and G2 ended up winning the tournament. SK Gaming didn't get to go to the Season 6 finals, the ones that were towards the end. Oh no, they did go to Season 6. It was ECS I'm thinking about. I've got confused on one. But whatever, you've seen they've been past big offline seasons. season. It was season 4 of ECS, the one that FaZe Clan won in Cancun over Mouse Sports that SK didn't qualify for. So you get teams who are elite level, world-class, world beaters who don't get to qualify for these LAN finals because of the online games. That should be a thing of the past now. If they don't make it now, well, then everyone will say, well, that's just because they weren't good enough in this LAN tournament. So no big problem anymore, right? It makes the tournaments really be able to compete with the biggest tournaments generally, whereas before they had to have these restrictions because online play had to mean something. You couldn't just play the online season and say, oh, sorry, whoever it might be, LDLC, it doesn't matter that you finished 6th, actually, we're going to give that spot to FaZe Clan who finished 9th because they're a better team on LAN, so we want them there instead. No, it had to play by the rules of the online component. I do find the financial aspect to this interesting though, because how did ESL come to an agreement to play less games overall and to spend more money by having the LAN component and presumably maybe agreeing to pay the teams to come in, or do the teams pay some of the costs? We don't know on that front. Presumably ESL pays it, because one of the reasons I understood why in the past ESL had to have this online play is because LANs are very expensive to put on. In fact, many LANs in Counter-Strike, some of the biggest ones that you would celebrate and say these are the best events of the year, lose money for the tournament organisers. They might make their money back on a smaller event or make it from the online package of number of hours they can sell, because the online league meant that you had very low costs. Everyone's playing the games online from home. You don't have to rent a venue, all the rest of it. You just have to rent the venue for the production and the casters. You had high amount of content for the cost that you're paying. Incredible. You have some of the best teams in the world playing, but you're paying very little for it overall. And you can sell to sponsors a certain amount of hours and a certain level of team that's the package they're buying into when they sponsor Pro League or they sponsor ESL as a company. Likewise, if you're a team, it was a positive. You could say, I'm going to play a minimum of 30 games this season, whatever it might be, 18 games. And I will definitely be playing that much no matter what against the best teams in the world on these top channels. Every single week, I can promise you this many hours. You could deliver upon that aspect. So this makes me wonder if ESL's being willing to give up some of the actual financial benefit from having the games online to take more control of the scene in terms of becoming the de facto best online league. Whereas before, it was debatable, depending on who you were and what criteria you went by, whether you thought ECS was better, whether you thought EPL was better. I personally thought EPL was better, but I could understand people debating between the two. At this point in time, unless ECS steps their game up and can match or best them, EPL is now the clear winner, clear best league in the world, because it's not even an online league for most regions, whereas ECS, as far as we know, still is the same sort of old league. Now, I actually have some inside information myself regarding FACEIT and ECS that I've confirmed through players who play in ECS, which is that about a month, maybe a month and a half ago, there were discussions going on behind the scenes with the teams of maybe we should pick between these leagues and putting pressure on the leagues if we've got to find a solution here for either the scheduling aspect or perhaps having it like this where you have like some sort of a cutoff, like you do this part of the year, we do this part of the year. And obviously ESL and FACEIT have no real reason to agree with each other and to help each other. They want to be the number one league, but the teams were putting them in a position where there was potentially a battle going on here. Maybe ESL was trying to figure out how do we get to be the league that's emphasized by the teams, that's considered the de facto league to these teams instead of competing against ECS directly. What do we need to give to the teams? What concessions do we have to make us the number one scene? And quite frankly, to make it going forwards, that in a kind of a soft exclusivity cap, because our league, which is now an offline league, will eventually be prioritized more and more and more. Eventually, if teams want to drop a league, it's going to be ECS they drop, no matter even if they get a percentage of the profits from that, because we're giving them such a massive advantage in terms of what they get for EPL. So I'd heard that was going on. I didn't have too much information to report beyond that. I just heard what was going on in that particular sense, and it was certainly interesting. I even heard something to do with like that's part of why Renegades was going to skip ECS. Like people were trying to get it so that they were taking a stand and putting pressure on these leagues to figure out a solution for the teams, primarily for the players. The players, the ones that are frustrated, burned out, felt like they played too much in their days off. Quite frankly, it doesn't change anything for the talent. They already travelled to the studio in Europe or Americas anyway, and they casted the games from there at whatever time of day they cast them. Some of them had to do them from Europe and therefore cast them late at night. If it was Europe, obviously you do it during prime time in Europe. That doesn't change anything for you all in all. In terms of the format, obviously, the group element, while I prefer the group element because I like tournaments over leagues, that means there's not as many games and you don't play all of the opposition in your region. In terms of what Pro League stood for, I consider that actually a downgrade or a negative. It's not as good that you don't get to play every single team. I thought that was really good for some of the younger teams or less experienced teams, the ones that don't make it to the big lands, to get a chance to play every single big team and prove themselves in that way. With that said, the logistics of playing every single team and running as many games just don't work if you're going to do it offline, quite frankly. I understand that element. This is more like a tournament, as I said, more like E-League. So as a result, individual games will matter more. I mean, that's initially. Like, obviously, individual games mattered a lot in the past in Pro League because they qualified in the LAN finals. But when you had that many games to play, a lot of them could seem throwaway. A lot of them could seem like, if we just do a streak at the end of the season, we can qualify. Now it's like a tournament. You know each game matters, and you know how much it matters, and you know that beating specific opponents in your group is really going to matter, not just willy-nilly winning X amount of games and therefore getting to the LAN finals. This is much more like a tournament. It also means less scheduling issues, both between leagues and tournaments, and generally, because you're going to be playing less games overall, and once you're eliminated, you're out of the league. No more scheduling for you. You can't be the last place team and have to play a bazillion games. There was an upside to that, as I said, for your org, but for the players, perhaps there weren't. Perhaps there's too many games there, and you don't want to forfeit them, because the last thing you want is the ESL to potentially punish you and or to get relegated from the league, right? So I personally prefer tournaments over leagues in terms of watching them, especially since online didn't particularly matter much to me. I didn't particularly care about. All I cared about was who qualifies for the LAN finals, and it didn't matter to me that someone like Fnatic might win the online season if when they get to LAN they're the 5th best team and they're not going to win the LAN finals. For me, the actual interest, the storylines didn't carry over. The storylines now, and this is a key element, narratives and storylines now begin on day one of this tournament, because if the team, like let's say FaZe doesn't make it to the next finals for season 9, we can say, well, they were competing on LAN and they were in a group that had, let's make up some names, shall we, LDLC, and they had Virtus.pro, I mean in the world of Virtus Pros in the league, and they had North in their league, and you know what, they weren't able to get out that group, and that's a group we expect them to win. So actually LAN performance, that factors in how you play in terms of offline form, because it is offline. You can no longer say, well, that doesn't matter, that's online, like I do. I don't factor online into my rankings, any of these factors. Now all these matches will be grist for the mill of the rankings. These can now count you into the rankings, doing well and getting through different phases. Not very much, admittedly, but it still matters. It's still a placing, right? Now, I will say, online also didn't matter in the past, because I always thought a mistake they made, the same mistake that they make in the LCS, where they don't do anything for the regular split, is they should have awarded people more than just prize money for the placings. I thought you should have got a trophy for the online portion. If you won the online portion, that should be a trophy. Yes, not as good as the offline one, but it should have celebrated something. Otherwise, you're admitting yourself that the online component doesn't matter as much, and you're being a bit cynical about it, right? Massive props to ESL for this move. I don't know how they pulled it off. I'm certainly interested to find out in the coming months. Perhaps they'll interview someone, have a talk show about it. Because however they logistically and financially were able to make this happen, this is big time news. I personally hope that doesn't mean ECS dies. I like as many tournaments as possible to exist, as many competitions, as many tournament organisers, so that we can have a lot of competition and the best scene and the viewer is the winner. But if you have to pick at the moment, I'm picking EPL over ECS, and I want to see how ECS responds. Because as I said, behind the scenes, there was something of a cold war going on, and there was definitely talk between players, teams, and the leagues themselves, and even some talk between the leagues as to how are we going to figure this out. Because on the one hand, we each want to succeed, but we also don't want to kill the scene, and we don't want teams to abandon us. And so who's going to offer what? And it seems as though ESL came up with the best offer. This video was kindly supported by Dean Tanglis, Andreas, Snazore Westerlund, Gardner Wilson, OllieJ, Tobias Bernasconi, NateDOhDoubleG, James Harding, Kyla Harris, Travis Greb, Daniel Yordanov, and as always, a special thanks goes out to Jerky's Minion. Would you like to suggest a topic or a guest for some of my upcoming content? Perhaps you want to ask me a question in my monthly AMA. Do you want to see some teasers? See who's going to be the next guest on one of my shows? Maybe you want to take part in an esports discussion with me. Well, put your money where your mouth is and join the Scrilluminati today at the Patreon link in the description box below.